明らかにこれは日本円が安くなる、いわゆる通貨の価値が落ちる、要は通貨配りまくるってことはそういうことじゃないですか。だって国債とかでなんとかするわけじゃないですか、最終的には。まあ増税はなかなか難しいんで、もうね消費税も 10% まで上がってるんで、増税すると人気なくなるから、じゃあ増税できないんだったら赤字国債出すしかないよねっていう話になって、赤字国債出すってことは円の価値が下がるってことですよねっていう。まあもちろん諸外国も配ってるから、ドルとかユーロもあれなんだけど、やっぱこれからどれだけ経済回復していくかっていうところにはリーダーシップがすごい大事になってくるわけで、当然それはだから予期されてるから日本円って下がってるじゃないですか。今だってガソリンの値段とかめちゃくちゃ上がってるでしょ。そうですね、もうなんかリッターに廃屋200円いくじゃねえかみたいな勢いが上がってきてるじゃないですか。でオイルが上がると全てのものの値段が上がるんで、もちろんインフレになるのは今の状態だったらいいんだけど、その分やっぱ生活厳しくなりますよねみたいな。今まで吉野家の牛丼をねなんか300いくらで食えてたのがなんか400いくらになるとか500いくらになるみたいな。マクドナルドのハンバーガーも1個400-500円ぐらいになるかもしれないですよね。それ大丈夫みたいな話ですよね。で吉野家の牛丼もショートプレートっつってバラ肉の部位を使ってんだけど、これも中国人が気づいちゃったから今どんどん上がってて、吉野家の牛丼が1000円になる時代も遠くないと思いますよ。
対 GDP 比で日本の赤字が一番でかいんですよ。でね、その対 GDP 比で借金額がの割合が高い 260% ぐらいで、もうイタリアとかもうギリシャなんかよっぽど高いんですね、対 GDP の借金額。これこそが放漫経済なんですけれども、なぜ対 GDP 比で比べるかっていうと、GDP 比が例えば2倍になると国民1人当たりも2倍になって国も2倍になるのが普通だ、常識的な考えなんですよね。人口が変わらなかったら2倍だって、全体のパイが2倍になるんだから1人当たりの豊かさも2倍になる、当たり前の話。要するに GDP が2倍になるということは税収も2倍になるんですよ。国も豊かになるということは税収も2倍になる。すなわち対 GDP の赤字額というのは税金でどの程度借金を返せるかという難易度ランキングなわけです。日本はダントツに 260% 高いということは、もう税金では返せない借金をという状況まで来てるわけですね。借金が溜まってるから財政は危ないって話です。ただ現実から言うとね、やっぱり2013年に異次元の量的緩和をやったんで今危なくないですよ、正直言って。なぜかというと今政府が吸っちゃうから。そうやって財政破綻はないんですけれども、その代わりに今一番危ないのは日銀の財務なんですよ。日銀がもう中央銀行としての機能を失ってるんですね。要するに今もし他の国みたいにインフレになったら日銀は引き締める手段ないです。なぜかというと債務超過になっちゃうから。お金がないからってんでどんどん吸っていった結果、お金の価値がもう暴落していっちゃった。だからそれがインフレであり、ものすごい暴落してれば何もお金では物を買えないということでハイパーインフレになったわけですよ。だからこれはもともとね、先人の知恵として政府のお金を吸っちゃいけませんよ。まさにその森永さん、拓郎さんがおっしゃってた統合政府の理論なんですけど、お金をすればいずれハイパーインフレになる。これ歴史が証明していること。今日本はそのことをやってるわけなんです。だから今確かに財政は大丈夫かもしれないけども、危機を先送りするために日銀が紙幣を吸っちゃった、そのせいで中央銀行の財務が危険な状況になったと。非常に危険なんですよ。
When you throw money, when you print money on the scale that modern nations are printing it, Japan, the United States, Europe, etc., we're getting into new territory in terms of size. The Japanese bought back not only a lot of their own debt, but a lot of their common stocks. So the Federal Reserve System, you can't imagine how much money printing Japan has done. And they haven't had all that much inflation, and it's still a very admirable civilization. In fact, you could argue that Japan is one of the more admirable civilizations in the whole world. And in spite of all this very extreme government money printing they've done, and they haven't had terrible consequences. Now they've had 25 years of stasis with living standards not improving very much. I don't think that came from their macroeconomic policies. I think that came from the rise of tough competition for their export powerhouse from China and Korea. But at any rate, it's weird what's happening, and nobody knows for sure how it's going to work out. I think it's encouraging that Japan can print as much money as it has and remain as civilized and calm and admirable as it has. And so I hope to God the United States has similar happy outcome. But I think the Japanese are better adapted for stasis than we are. I think it's a duty-filled, civilized bunch of people, a lot of them older, not many young people, and they just suck it in and cope. In our country, we have terrible tensions. It's way harder to run a country which is not mono-ethnic like Japan. There's some professor at Harvard that has written extensively on this subject. It's way harder to run a nation like the United States with different ethnicities and groups and so forth than it is to run Japan. Japan is basically sort of a mono-ethnic civilization which is proud of its ethnicity, and of course they can cope with it troubles better than some other people can. There's never been anything quite like what we're doing now, and we do know from what's happened in other nations, if you try and print too much money, it eventually causes terrible trouble. And we are closer to terrible trouble than we've been in the past, but it may still be a long way off. I certainly hope so. Think of all the Latin American countries that print too much money. They get strongmen and so forth. That's what Plato said happened in the early Greek city-state democracies. One person, one vote, a lot of equality, and you get demagogues, and the demagogues lather up the population, and pretty soon you don't have your democracy anymore. I don't think that was a crazy idea on Plato's part. I think that accurately described what happened in Greece way back then, and it's happened again and again and again in Latin America. We don't want to go there. At least I don't. We've done something pretty extreme, and we don't know how bad the troubles will be, whether we're going to be like Japan or something a lot worse. And what makes life interesting is we don't know how it's going to work out. I think we do know we're flirting with serious trouble. I think we also know that some of our earlier fears were overblown. Japan is still existing as a civilized nation, in spite of unbelievable excess by all former standards in terms of money printing. Think of how seductive it is. You have a bunch of interest-bearing debts, and you pay them off with checking accounts, which you're no longer paying interest. Think of how seductive that is for a bunch of legislators. You get rid of the interest payments and the money supply goes up. It seems like heaven. And of course, when things get that seductive, they're likely to be overused.
How will this all play out, and what's the best advice you have for individual investors to optimally deal with the negative impact of inflation other than owning quality equities?
It may be that you have to choose the least bad of a bunch of options. That frequently happens in human decision making. And the mongers have Berkshire stock, Costco stock, Chinese stocks through Lilu, a little bit of Daily Journal stock, and a bunch of apartment houses. Do I think that's perfect? No. Do I think it's okay? Yes. I think the great lesson from the mongers is you don't need all this damn diversification. That's plenty of, you're lucky if you've got 4 good assets. I think the finance professors and that sell the idea that perfect diversification is professional investment. If you're trying to do better than average, you're lucky if you have 4 things to buy. And to ask for 20 is really asking for egg in your beer. It's very few people can have enough brains to get 20 good investments. If you stop to think about it, my way in life was not predicting little short-term differences between the Russell index and the Standard & Poor's index. I don't have any opinion about which index is better at any given time. I never even think about it. I'm always just looking for something that's good enough to put Munger money in, or Berkshire money in, or Daily Journal money in. And I figure that I want to swim as well as I can against the tides. I'm not trying to predict the tides. If you're going to invest in stocks for the long term or real estate, of course there are going to be periods when there's a lot of agony and other periods when there's a boom. And I think you just have to learn to live through them. As Kipling said, treat those 2 imposters just the same. You have to deal with daylight and night. Does that bother you very much? No. Sometimes it's night and sometimes it's daylight. Sometimes it's a boom, sometimes it's a bust. I believe in doing as well as you can and keep going as long as they let you. So I think it's hard to predict how your world is going to change if you're going to talk about 70, 80, 90 years. Just think, imagine they wiped out the shareholders of General Motors, they wiped out the shareholders of Kodak. Who in the hell would have predicted that? This technological change can destroy a lot of people. And I think it's hard to predict for sure in advance. We have a hugely strong economy and a hugely strong technical civilization. And that's not going away. And the knowledge and so forth. And you can't believe what a modern factory looks like when you fill it with robots. And that's coming more and more and more. And it's coming to China too, for that matter. And so those trends are inevitable. And I don't know how it's all going to play out, but I think it does create adjustment problems. If you have a fine unionized job and they replace you with a robot, you've got a difficult problem. If you've got a company like Kodak and they invent something new that obsoletes your product, you have a problem too, and you solve that by dying. A lot of people don't like that solution. I don't much care for it myself.
Prior to the pandemic, it seemed like the U.S. was getting used to borrowing and running revenue deficits of close to 20%. There are all kinds of reasons for this through multiple administrations of either party. Meantime, we're headed to higher interest rate costs on top of our $30 trillion in debt. Today, interest comprises 6% of our spending, and the potential to double or triple interest expense is only going to make the problem worse. How can we get the public, companies, and politicians to recognize the seriousness of this problem and begin to take action?
Because all those problems are real, and because it's so tempting to get rid of your debt by just giving a guy a non-interest-bearing checking account where you used to have to pay him interest every month. Not only do we have a serious problem, but the solution to it that is the easiest for the politicians and for the Federal Reserve too, for that matter, is just to print more money and solve the temporary problems that way. And that, of course, is going to have some long-term dangers. And we know what happened in Germany when the Weimar Republic just kept printing money. The whole thing blew up, and that was a contributor to the rise of Hitler. So all this stuff is dangerous and serious, and we don't want to have a bunch of politicians just doing whatever is easy on the theory that it didn't hurt us last time, so we can double it and do it one more time, and then we double it again and so forth. We know what happens on that everlasting doubling. You will have a very different government if you keep doing that enough. And so you're flirting with danger somewhere, unless there's some discipline in the process. But I don't regard Japan as in some terrible danger. They've done a huge amount of this and gotten by with it. I don't think we'll be as good at handling our problems as Japan is. Well, you have to be optimistic about the competency of our technical civilization. But there again, it's an interesting thing. If you take the last 100 years, 1922 to 2022, most of modernity came in that 100 years. And in the previous 100 years, that got another big chunk of modernity. And before that, things were pretty much the same for the previous thousands of years. Life was pretty brutal and short and limited and what have you. No printing press, no air conditioning, no modern medicine, no. So, and in what I call the real human needs, think of what it meant to get, say, first you got the steam engine, the steamship, the railroad, and a little bit of improvement in farming and a little bit of improvement in plumbing. That's what you got in the 100 years that ended in 1922. The next 100 years gave us widely distributed electricity, modern medicine, modern firearms, the automobile, the airplane, the records, the movies, the air conditioning in the South. And think what a blessing it was. If you wanted 6 children, if you wanted 3 children, you had to have 6 because 3 died in infancy. That was our ancestors. Think of the agony of watching half your children die. It's amazing how much achievement there's been in civilization in these last 200 years, and most of it in the last 100 years. Now, the trouble with it is that the basic needs are pretty well filled. In the United States, the principal problem of the poor people is they're too fat. That is a very different place from what happened in the past. In the past, they were on the edge of starving. And what happens is, it's really interesting, is with all this enormous increase in living standards and freedom and diminishment of racial inequities and all the huge progress that has come, people are less happy about the state of affairs than they were when things were way tougher. And that has a very simple explanation. The world is not driven by greed, it's driven by envy. And so the fact that everybody's 5 times better off than they used to be, they take it for granted. All they think about is somebody else has having more now, and it's not fair that he should have it and they don't. That's the reason that God came down and told Moses that you couldn't envy your neighbor's wife or even his donkey. I mean, even the old Jews were having trouble with envy. And so it's built into the nature of things. It's weird for somebody my age, because I was in the middle of the Great Depression when the hardship was unbelievable. I was safer walking around Omaha in the evening than I am in my own neighborhood in Los Angeles after all this great wealth and so forth. So, and I have no way of doing anything about it. I can't change the fact that a lot of people are very unhappy and feel very abused after everything's improved by about 600%, because there's still somebody else who has more. I have conquered envy in my own life. I don't envy anybody. I don't give a damn what somebody else has. But other people are driven crazy by it. And other people play to the envy in order to advance their own political careers. And we have whole networks now that they want to pour gasoline on the flames of envy. I like the religion of the old Jews. I like the people who were against envy, not the people who were trying to profit from it. But if you stop to think of the pretentious expenditures of the rich, who in the hell needs a Rolex watch so you can get mugged for it? You know, I mean, it's, yet everybody wants to have a pretentious expenditure. And that helps drive demand in our modern capitalist society. My advice to the young people is don't go there. The hell with the pretentious expenditure. I don't think there's much happiness in it. But it does drive the civilization we actually have. Steve Pinker of Harvard is one of our smart modern academics. He constantly points out how everything's gotten way better. But the general feeling about how fair it is has gotten way more hostile. And as it gets better and better, people are less and less satisfied. That is weird, but that's what's happened.
日銀が発表した資金循環統計によりますと、去年12月末時点で日銀が保有する国の借金である国債の残高は546兆9301億円でした。国債の発行残高は1051兆円余りで、日銀の保有割合は 52% を超え、過去最高を更新しました。日銀は国債を大量